Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not avoiding alimony payments by getting shot down off the top of the Empire State Building, I'm here at the Wolfula reviewing movies. I review the daddy of all giant monster movies, the original King Kong. So now it's time to review its sons, Son of Kong, the direct sequel to the original film, and Mighty Joe Young, King Kong's spiritual successor, both directed by Ernest B. Schoedsack solo and released in 1933 and 1949 respectively, with Son of Kong coming out the same year the original King Kong came out. Yeah, they made Son of Kong in less than 8 months. People talk about rushed sequels. King Kong's first sequel is on a whole other level.
You're not a patch on your old man.
Full-length movie sequels were still a rarity by the early 30s, and when a sequel was made during pre-code Hollywood, it'd often just be more of a loose follow-up with maybe a similar cast and/or theme to the previous film, but with no narrative ties in order for the sequel to stand on its own.
I'm singing a song, just singing a song. Come on, give me all you got.
Direct sequels at this time were seen as a risk. Audiences might not go to see a sequel because they might think it's the same exact movie as the original. An audience would obviously prefer to just spend their cash on something totally new, and a low-quality sequel could potentially lower the value of the original movie's reissues. Film executives used to be concerned about these things until they found out sequels can actually make money. Monster films were seen as a safe bet to test the waters of movie sequels because monster films were seen as disposable and cheap. More likely to turn a profit, still are unfortunately. Before Universal began sequelizing its classic monsters with films about their brides, daughters, and sons though, RKO gave the world Kong's Son. The first King Kong was a massive hit, and RKO still had some of the expensive sets, costumes, props, and puppets from that first movie. They could reuse a lot of those assets and fast-track a sequel for a third of the budget 8 months after the first film while Kong was still fresh in people's minds. In other words, cash in. How do you make a sequel to King Kong, though? He's fucking dead. The whole point of the movie is him dying. Well, maybe he had a son we just didn't see. Maybe King Kong was a shitty dad, chasing young blondes during his midlife crisis instead of spending time with his boy. So, Son of Kong was released in December of 1933, 8 months after the first. And you know, it was never gonna be as big of a classic as the original, but despite its rush status, is Son of Kong at least a fun monster movie sequel? No, not really. Here's my review of Son of Kong. But first, I have a message from my sponsor, me. Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here's the movie I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested, and I thank you in advance. Before Son of Kong begins, it lets us know it's a member of the NRA. I thought monkeys only used guns when Charlton Heston was around.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
In reality, the NRA here was the National Recovery Administration. Ask your great-great-grandparents what that was.
Carl Denham.
Son of Kong is the story of film director turned Broadway giant ape promoter Carl Denham in the aftermath of Kong's rampage in New York, which Denham was responsible for.
You're big news, you know.
What, after a whole month? It's time enough for New York to forget the World War.
Ann Darrow and Jack Driscoll are completely absent from this sequel. Their fates aren't revealed and they aren't even mentioned. This sequel was low budget, so I figure RKO could only afford to have one of the 3 leads from the first movie. So they chose Robert Armstrong as Carl Denham. Makes sense, Denham moved the story in the original film.
Kong is dead, but everybody's interested in you too, Mr. Denham. All those people that Kong killed and injured.
In the wake of King Kong's killing spree and subsequent demise at the hands of Beauty, Carl Denham is facing mounting lawsuits from the city of New York for the property damage Kong caused, along with Denham being sued for all the injuries and deaths that the Eighth Wonder inflicted.
Don't you suppose I'm sorry for the harm he did? Old Kong, I'm sure paying for what I did to you.
Instead of owning up to his mistakes, Denham decides to pull a ditty and flee the country as the new first mate of Captain Engelhorn's ship, the SS Venture.
You're pretty swell to be willing to take me with you.
Yeah, this is the hero of the movie we're supposed to be rooting for, folks. A guy who's too much of a coward to face the consequences of his actions. Real fucking heroic.
I brought Kong back here. He got loose, did a lot of damage, got killed, and that's that. What can I do about it?
Denham and Englehorn go on many adventures together that we don't get to see. Instead, we get to see exciting text of the places they visit, culminating in Dekang, a fictional Dutch-owned port in Indonesia.
Get that number 2 hatch off and break out the cargo.
Between shipping jobs, Denham and the captain decide to take in the local color by attending a song and dance act.
Skipper, there's a show in town.
Featuring cute little monkeys. Forget about King Kong, these guys are the real 8th wonders of the world. Just look at them go, yeah! Well, at least Charlie the cook is having a good time. The monkeys were just the warm-up act. The real star is La Belle Helene singing and guitar playing.
That trains are going somewhere and steamers are sailing the blue.
And she kind of just sounds like Betty Boop.
You know, she's got something.
It certainly isn't a voice.
She's got personality.
And a nice ass.
For me.
We paid $20 for this?
Thank you for your kind reception of our effort.
Anyway, later that night, Helene here's father, the ringmaster, goes drinking with a guy in town he has something in common with. Being white, I guess.
Is that man coming again tonight?
Well, he's a white man. Somebody to talk to.
The ringmaster's pal is Nils Hellstrom, played by John Marston of Red Dead Redemption fame. And after a bitter exchange of words and broken bottles, Hellstrom causes a fire and pulls a Carl Denham by fleeing from his consequences, leaving Helene to narrowly escape with her father's corpse as she watches her home burn down. Wow, this is super depressing. Show those monkeys playing the instruments again. Look at them go. Denham notices that Helene is down on her luck, but since he doesn't have any giant gorilla extractions planned for the near future, all Carl can do for the young girl after she buried her father today is give her a few bucks in the hopes that it will absolve him of his past sins.
Please take me with you. I won't be any trouble.
But Helene insists upon joining Carl in his adventures because she needs a new daddy.
I'll let me go with you. Please. Please.
Yes, Helene, a 19-year-old girl, is implied to have a crush on this 42-year-old man, but Carl likes his girls a little younger.
Good luck.
Carl turns Helene down, but Carl does take up an offer to join his crew from Helene's father's murderer, Hellstrom, who was also the man that originally gave Denham the map to Skull Island.
The man who gave me the map of Kong's Island.
And Hellstrom, who is a totally trustworthy dude, reveals that Skull Island has a hidden treasure just waiting to be stolen by 3 crafty white guys.
Did you find the treasure?
Well, I never even heard of it.
So a new adventure to Skull Island begins, but a few wrenches are thrown into the works. 1, Denham won't stop getting political on me.
We must be in Russia. Here comes the Committee of the Workers.
2, Helene has stowed away on the Venture, and 3, Hellstrom organizes a mutiny against Englehorn and Denham for taking the Venture back to Skull Island, where so many past crew members met their demises.
If those animals kill anybody, it won't be us.
So the crew smartly exiles Denham, Englehorn, and Helene to Skull Island. Charlie chooses to join his bosses, though, because he kinda hopes to get eaten by a dinosaur. He heard it would be cool.
Did they throw you off, too? No, throw off. Get off.
Hellstrom ends up in exile as well due to his ambitions on the new Venture, a captainless ship of equals.
We're through with captains on this ship.
And for whatever reason, Denham saves Hellstrom, even though Hellstrom got them into this dire situation to begin with, and also murdered Helene's dad. I guess Denham can't have more blood on his hands.
When the natives see us, I bet they'll throw a party.
Carl assumed that he'd be greeted with a warm reception by the Skull Islanders for ridding them of Kong, but they were doing just fine keeping Kong behind a wall. Kong ended up killing countless and destroying the village, so the Skull Islanders can't fuck with Carl Denham anymore.
Because his village is destroyed and his people are killed, and it's all our fault for leading Kong inside the wall.
I don't blame him. This movie is a revelation of how much of a dick Carl Denham really is. Kind of felt like Peter Jackson made Jack Black's Carl Denham too cynical and smarmy, but no. Taking Son of Kong into account, the remake is definitely true to Carl Denham's character.
I'm real good at crapping the crappers.
Now, there's something I have to disclose to you about Son of Kong. There's a reason nobody talks about this sequel all that much. It's not that it's necessarily bad. I mean, it's not good, mind you. It's just that not a whole lot happens in Son of Kong. It's mostly filler. Denham doesn't reach Skull Island until 43 minutes into the sequel, which might not sound bad until you take into account that this movie is 69 minutes long. Nice, but actually, you know, not nice in this context.
Maybe we can climb up someplace.
The film is called Son of Kong, but by the time we actually get to meet him, the movie's almost over, and Kong's albino son Kiko's reveal is such a non-moment. Kiko's stuck in quicksand, and Denham doesn't want to have another giant ape's blood on his hands, so Carl hands Kiko a dead tree well within the ape's reach, saving Kiko's life, sorta, I guess.
There's a little Kong. What? How little?
Despite having little screen time in his own movie, though, Kiko is fittingly and easily the standout of Son of Kong just for Willis O'Brien's stop-motion animation of the character.
Hey, look what you're doing, you big dummy!
Kiko is a departure from his fierce old man. Kiko's gentle, gregarious, kind-hearted, and sensitive, which also marks Son of Kong's departure from the original film's more intense horror tone. Son of Kong is much more of a kid's comedy movie. Ruth Rose, the writer of Son of Kong in the final drafts of the original movie, said she knew they couldn't make a movie better than the first, especially on the limited budget, so she decided to just make the sequel more funny and lighthearted. Even when Kiko was told by Denham that his father was brutally killed because of Denham's actions,
I'm the guy that knocked out your pop with a gas bomb and then carried him off to New York in chains.
Kiko's still totally chill with Denham, though that may be because Kiko doesn't understand English. It's probably that.
I've been sorry for it ever since.
Son of Kong's adventure is obviously much more limited in scope, made up mostly of unused puppets from King Kong and Willis O'Brien's cancelled film Creation. For instance, the Styracosaur cut out of King Kong's spider pit sequence is put to use cornering Englehorn, Hellstrom, and Charlie. Kiko himself is just the long-faced Kong's armature from the original movie, stripped and reskinned. He's a literal chip off the old block. Because Kiko is canonically only 12 feet tall, though, half his father's height,
About 12 feet high. Good.
the movie is limited in what the Son of Kong can actually fight in defense of Denham and Helene, but Kiko does fight a giant bear, which is sorta surprising since besides the Kongs, Skull Island is mostly dinosaurs, and then you suddenly have a giant bear out of nowhere. Kind of a waste of a monster slot given the limited screen time Skull Island has, but whatever. Ultimately, even though Hellstrom was obviously lying about knowing that Skull Island had a treasure, this movie still turns into an Indiana Jones prototype anyway, as Denham discovers a hidden treasure, the Crystal Skull. But Kiko has had enough of being in this movie and tries to put himself out of his misery before fridges can be nuked. But Kiko just ends up breaking Denham's gun right as a Nothosaurus arrives, who's fucking pissed. But luckily, Kiko pile drives it and then plays with its corpse like his dad liked to do. He might not be as violent, but Kong's son is still a bit of a psychopath. Englehorn, Hellstrom, and Charlie find Denham and Helene, but Hellstrom ends up scared off by the sight of Kiko, and the film remembers that nobody at all has fucking died, and there's only 5 minutes left. So Hellstrom gets eaten by an Elasmosaurus. That's a real fucking shame. Hellstrom was a nice guy. After Hellstrom's death, for whatever reason, an earthquake and hurricane strikes Skull Island simultaneously, and Englehorn, Charlie, and Helene somehow are able to survive all of this in a little rowboat while dinosaurs and natives are drowning all around them. Denham is left behind with Kiko, and as the flooding swallows Skull Island, Kiko's foot becomes stuck, but Kiko uses his final moments to save the life of the man responsible for his father's death. If you think about it, Son of Kong is kind of a biblical parable, a Christ allegory. Kong, a god, gave the world his only son, who dies so that others may have a chance to live in Kong's kingdom of heaven. During a great flood, even a sinner like Carl Denham can be saved. Beautiful.
Look! Look!
In the aftermath, Denham and the rest of the gang are rescued by a ship that just happened to be passing by a part of the ocean supposedly nobody goes through. And with the necklace Denham stole from a civilization he really fucked over, he'll be rich again. Rich enough to pay off his debts to society. And hey, Helene and Denham decide to spend their lives together. 23-year age difference and all. Such a happy Hollywood ending. Kong's infant son is dead, Skull Island and its people were wiped out, but a middle-aged man got rich in the process and gets to date a teenager. Cool!
This is nice, isn't it?
Son of Kong isn't a bad movie, it's just kinda lame and uneventful. It's sort of a funny exploration of Carl Denham's character and the realistic blowback he'd face after unleashing Kong in New York, but the movie is over before it really begins. It's mostly exposition, with very little payoff. There are barely any dinosaurs, and what stop-motion animation there is looks crude compared to the original. We barely even get to know the titular Son of Kong before he gets fucking killed. the sequel is just kind of a bummer and very clearly rushed. Imagine if RKO spent the time and money they did on the original King Kong. They could have had a sequel that may not have been as good, but would have been really fun to watch, something special that could have led to more Kong sequels and maybe even a Toho-esque franchise of giant monster movies brought to life through stop motion. But RKO just wanted money when they could have also had adventure, fame, and the thrill of a lifetime. And there wouldn't be another Kong movie for nearly 30 years. I give Son of Kong a Kiko out of King Kong.
You're not a patch on your old man.
Now let's move on to my review of Mighty Joe Young, which isn't a direct Kong sequel, but is conceptually similar and made by the original creators of Kong. Following King Kong's success, World War II eventually broke out, and the directors of Kong, Marion C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schutzak, who were World War I veterans themselves, re-enlisted to serve in the Second World War. Schutzak lost his sight during World War II while testing equipment. The force of an explosion caused Schutzak to bash his head against a tank, detaching his retina, leading Schutzak to become blind for the remainder of his life. Despite being blind, though, Schutzak continued to direct when the war ended, and Schutzak reunited with his wife, the writer Ruth Rose, his co-director turned producer Marion C. Cooper, and stop-motion animators Willis O'Brien and Marcel Delgado to create a proper follow-up to King Kong that could be a more upbeat influence in a post-war world. Mighty Joe Young. The film tells the story of a girl named Jill Young who trades a big-ass flashlight for a big-ass baby gorilla dubbed Joe.
Jill, where did that come from?
Oh, that's Joe, Father. Isn't she sweet?
That's a baby gorilla.
And in a Clifford-like twist, 12 years later, Joe grows to be 12 feet tall and weigh 2,000 pounds. Joe's height is inconsistent throughout the film, much like Kong's was, for the sake of making certain scenes more dramatic. Robert Armstrong returned as a Carl Denham-like character named Max O'Hara, a New York event promoter opening a jungle-themed nightclub in Hollywood, and O'Hara searches Africa for animals to star in his upcoming venue.
Don't you think I ought to go to Africa?
Why, sure.
There you are. There's a smart guy.
Joining O'Hara in the expedition is Greg, played by Ben Johnson in his first starring role as an Oklahoman cowboy.
Saw in the paper how Mr. O'Hara's going to Africa. Now, there's a place I've always wanted to see.
During their African safari, O'Hara and Greg encountered Joe inadvertently freeing one of the lions the hunters captured, so O'Hara decides to catch the giant ape as a consolation prize. But O'Hara and Greg are thwarted by Joe's mother, Jill, now an adult played by Terry Moore, so O'Hara decides to cut Jill a deal.
Boy, it sounds wonderful. I've never been anywhere.
Having her and Joe be the headlines of O'Hara's new nightclub, which looks like a slightly more racist rainforest cafe. And Jill reluctantly agrees, with her and Joe becoming stars in the process. Essentially, Mighty Joe Young cuts out the prehistoric adventure elements of King Kong and tells a somewhat more grounded and character-driven tale with a giant ape in the center.
You and Joe will be working for me from now on.
Much like Son of Kong, Joe is more sympathetic, but Kiko was cartoonishly exaggerated in his portrayal. Still a monster, just goofy. Meanwhile, Mighty Joe Young is much more authentic in its portrayal of a gorilla. He just happens to be a really huge gorilla. Compared to King Kong, Willis O'Brien became less active animating Mighty Joe Young, overseeing production of the effects while Marcel Delgado, Pete Peterson, and most notably a young Ray Harryhausen took over animating duties for the most part. Yes, Mighty Joe Young was the first full-length film that the legendary Ray Harryhausen animated for. Willis O'Brien's work on The Lost World and King Kong inspired Harryhausen to become an animator. Harryhausen was only hired to be an assistant to Willis O'Brien, but Harryhausen ended up doing most of the film's animation, with Harryhausen's work on Mighty Joe Young being a leap forward for the medium of stop motion. Ray Harryhausen's work on Mighty Joe Young is set apart from his later monster animation work in that Harryhausen portrays a gentler, more sympathetic creature, portraying an animal as opposed to the monster that Kong was before it. Harryhausen studied gorillas in captivity, really got into an ape's mind in the process of executing his animation.
Put that down, I tell you. Mind me this minute. Stop it.
Joe, as the title suggests, is mighty, but he's also clumsy and easily distracted like an ape would be. There's a childish spontaneity and improvisational quality to the performance of Joe that makes him feel like a natural character. Thanks to Marcel Delgado, Joe's face is capable of a wider range of emotions compared to Kong, and it allows for more soulfulness in Joe's eyes, making him really cute, but also selling the sadness Joe experiences in captivity. Another notable departure between Mighty Joe Young and King Kong is that Kong was more of an escapist fairy tale in another world, so it made heavy use of miniature sets with the actors being integrated into them. Mighty Joe Young instead makes much more use of rear projection to place Joe against real-life environments shot for the film, allowing Joe to interact a lot more with the film's actors, really selling the bond between Jill and Joe.
Want another one? Here!
Mighty Joe Young also has far more sophisticated armatures for human characters in its stop-motion scenes compared to King Kong. The humans in Kong often look like Gumby, but in Mighty Joe Young they look a lot more believable and seamlessly segue into their live-action counterparts. King Kong was a tragedy, but it was admittedly undercut by how much of a psycho Kong was and how nobody really liked him, even Anne. So Mighty Joe Young is less dark and much more heartfelt in its tragedy. Like Carl Denham, Max O'Hara exploits Mighty Joe Young for entertainment, but O'Hara puts on actual shows that are elaborate and thought out, while Denham just chained Kong up to a platform and called it a night.
Wow! Look at the size of that platform!
O'Hara's shows become much more crudely exploitative of Joe, who becomes depressed, living in a cramped cage, and this abuse ultimately culminates in Joe being given hooch by some drunks, which leads to Joe going on a drunken rampage in the nightclub, and in the aftermath, it's ruled that Joe must be put to death.
I'm very sorry, Miss Young, but he must be shot.
It shows how much the perspective by Kong's creators shifted. Kong's death was treated as justified, even though it wasn't his fault he was in New York to begin with. But in Mighty Joe Young, it's clearly communicated that Joe isn't a mindless monster. Humans pushed him and he felt threatened.
I'll teach you.
So Joe facing the same fate as Kong would be a lot more heartbreaking.
You don't want to be down here when they come to shoot him.
But luckily, Jill, Greg, and O'Hara rescue Joe.
Step on it, Greg.
And also, luckily for the sake of Joe's need for good publicity, an orphanage catches fire while the cops pursue Joe, who heroically comes to a baby's rescue in what is an amazing blend of live action and animation, with so many dynamic angles and exciting action for the time this film was released. If only King Kong saved a baby, they wouldn't have shot him off the Empire State Building.
There's nobody in the world gonna shoot Joe now.
Mighty Joe Young is essentially the anti-King Kong movie. It takes the basic premise of its predecessor while removing the more fantastical elements and replacing them with more heart and a happily ever after ending.
And they lived happily ever after. They're back home where they belong.
It's a wonderful, charming film that might not be as great as King Kong, and definitely wasn't anywhere near as successful, but it's still a classic with some innovative stop-motion animation brought to life by young Ray Harryhausen. I give Mighty Joe Young a big gorilla at a big flashlight. Mighty Joe Young won an Oscar for visual effects, leading to Willis O'Brien's greater recognition.
Thank you very, very much. But
the film was a flop, and a sequel that was planned called Joe Meets Tarzan ended up being canceled. Probably for the best. But since I'm still on the subject of Mighty Joe Young, I might as well also review Disney's forgotten 1998 remake. Disney in the 90s was really obsessed with jungle-themed movies to the point where they made an animated adaptation of Tarzan 2 years after they made a live-action adaptation of an animated Tarzan parody. In between, Disney remade Mighty Joe Young, probably considering it to be a family-friendly alternative to the King Kong remake Universal was planning with Peter Jackson. And though the Mighty Joe Young remake is pretty faithful to the original while modernizing the plot and effects, even featuring a fun cameo with Terry Moore and Ray Harryhausen.
She reminds me of somebody, but I can't think who it is.
You when we first met.
The Mighty Joe Young remake suffers from being Disneyified down to the point the film opens with Jill's and Joe's mothers both being killed by a cartoonishly evil hunter.
Promise me to protect him. I promise.
If you're a mom in a Disney film, you better hope you have a big juicy ass, or else you're gonna end up dead. Jill Young grows up to be Charlize Theron, and Joe, of course, grows up to be huge, brought to life with a really impressive suit designed by Rick Baker, blended with CGI that holds up pretty well without upstaging the practical effects. The problem from here is that there isn't a very exciting story to go along with the movie's high production values.
How did you keep him a secret all these years?
By keeping people like you off this mountain.
Essentially, the late Bill Paxton plays a zoologist named Greg who convinces Jill to take Joe, the giant gorilla she raised after his mother was killed, to an LA nature preserve where Joe will be safe from the poachers encroaching on his habitat. Once Joe is in his new cramped enclosure, he just gets kinda sad. Also, there's a weird romance between Charlize Theron and Bill Paxton.
What is it?
I'm sorry. Just think.
Which was in the original movie, but here Jill and Greg have a 20-year age difference. It could have been more sweet having him be more of a mentor figure than a lover, but there's just something about Hollywood having a fascination towards women dating men the same age as their dad.
You're not too afraid to let Joe know what time you'll be.
Disney's Mighty Joe Young ultimately suffers in the same way a lot of later Disney films suffer. It's more preoccupied with having a lesson than it is in trying to be entertaining. Joe ending up at a nature preserve instead of being exploited is positive, I guess, but there's no conflict in it. Joe doesn't get to do much for most of the movie. It's just Jill kind of being frustrated with the nature preserve containing Joe, obviously not being as good as Joe's natural habitat. It's just kind of boring.
I swear to you, Joe is still not himself.
Try to inject some life into the film, the movie has a cartoonish villain. The poacher who killed Joe's and Jill's mothers, and who lost 2 of his digits in the process. Played by Mr. Millich from Eyes Wide Shut, the guy who prostituted his underage daughter.
If you wait long enough, the opportunity for justice finally comes.
In this movie, he's slightly less evil as a guy running a sham nature preserve that's really a front for his poaching enterprise.
Our only interest is the well-being of our animals.
But the villain is established with a scene where he accepts a panda into his care and then asks a henchman how much the panda's organs will go for on the black market.
See what the market is for the organs of this lovely panda.
Jesus Christ! It's insanely cartoonishly evil, and this poacher has his eyes set on stealing Joe Young, provoking the ape into going on rampages so the poacher can have Joe all for himself. The movie doesn't really get exciting until the last act, where we get to see Joe essentially go on a King Kong rampage on Hollywood Boulevard. But because this is a kid's movie, Joe can't be too destructive. The remake is just so much more tame compared to the original film's action scenes 50 years earlier. What's the point of special effects if you don't use them to do anything special? In a departure from the original Mighty Joe Young, though, Joe actually kills somebody after wreaking havoc at a fairground, in this case murking the cartoonishly evil villain. Savage as fuck! But like in the original film, Joe is spared from, in this case, an ambiguously grim fate by saving a child from a structure collapsing. A life for a life.
Mommy! Oh, honey. Oh.
The ending of the remake is pretty ridiculous, though. Jill says they need money to build Joe a bigger nature preserve.
Somewhere safe means a new home for Joe. Where are we gonna get that kind of money?
And then everybody in the crowd starts handing them some cash. And then it cuts to the nature preserve just being built. What? It's that easy?
Legends live forever.
Much like Son of Kong, Disney's Mighty Joe Young remake isn't bad. It's just dull and toothless, lacking in drama and action for most of the film, and I unfortunately didn't care for Rick Baker's Joe like I did Ray Harryhausen's. I give Disney's Mighty Joe Young a Jungle to Jungle out of George of the Jungle.
Oh, Joe, yeah!
Next up, I'll be reviewing the original Godzilla, the film that kicked off Japan's kaiju craze. Click subscribe and the bell so you don't miss it. This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.